ending of the original Night Court tied up loose ends and featured a very special guest spot from a jazz singer known as the Velvet Fog. Here's how the long-running sitcom left the airwaves on a high note. Night Court didn't have to wait 3 decades for the events of its final episodes to be undone. It only took a couple of weeks, a stray unaired episode, and a hole in the NBC programming schedule. The series finale was a 2-parter titled Opportunity Knock Knocks, which aired in a 1-hour block on Wednesday, May 13, 1992. The episodes were promoted on NBC as the end of an era, and the episodes could not be mistaken for anything but a show's final bow in both form and content. Yet, on a Sunday night more than 2 weeks later, what does NBC put on the air? A brand new episode of Night Court. Sunday evening programming on NBC in those years was a hodgepodge of special events, movies of the week, and sitcom reruns. This particular episode, the 1992 boat show, was produced earlier in the season, but for whatever reason was knocked from its planned premiere date. Directed by series regular Charles Mack Robinson, the episode sees another one of Dan's social climbing schemes blow up in his face when he gets a fancy columnist out of jury duty in exchange for a write-up in the society pages, only for the reporter to become entranced with Roz instead. For anyone paying attention in 1992, that extra episode of Night Court must have been doubly confusing. Not only had the previous 2 episodes been explicitly billed as the end of the show, but they sent several of the series' main characters off into the sunset, only for them to pop up in court once again in boat show as if nothing had happened. Networks deciding to air episodes out of sequence was, of course, nothing new at the time, and remains a questionable practice even today when shows are far more serialized in general than they used to be. Plot-wise, the finale marks the conclusion of 2 ongoing storylines that were begun a few episodes earlier. These include Christine's surprisingly difficult congressional race against a deeply unserious opponent, and Harry's decision to step down from the bench and become a law professor. More importantly, though, the episodes resolve emotional journeys that have been going on since nearly the first episode, from Harry and Christine's seesawing romantic relationship to Dan's womanizing. However, all of this works together to examine something even more important: the general feeling that the Night Court is a somewhat melancholy place full of people who got there by happenstance and then never left. As Harry weighs his options about whether to leave the bench, job offers start pouring in. First, it is a professorship at Columbia Law, then a partnership with a prestigious white shoe firm, then a possible judgeship in the Superior Court, then somehow a sponsorship deal with Nike. Just when things start to feel a little ridiculous, jazz singer Mel Torme, nicknamed the Velvet Fog, bursts into Harry's office with an offer to go on tour and work on his next album together. As goofball and non-sequitur as the show's humor could be, Torme didn't pop out of thin air for the finale. Instead, his appearance is the capper for dozens of jokes and cameos going all the way back to Season 1, when Torme superfan Harry staged a one-person concert in his chambers. The 1980s saw a wave of nostalgia for the big band era that made stars out of young band leaders like Wynton Marsalis and Harry Connick Jr., while shining a fresh spotlight on survivors like Torme and Tony Bennett. Torme eventually guested on the show 9 times, usually as himself or as Harry's guardian angel. Though the aging crooner's role was always tongue-in-cheek, the show's appreciation of him was absolutely genuine. Lead actor Harry Anderson had been a lifelong fan even before the series and spoke at Torme's funeral in 1999. As Harry weighs his options for which of his many ludicrous job offers to take, he has written each of them down on an index card tacked to a small corkboard. He looks at the board, pauses, then turns it away from the camera and the audience. He plays eeny meeny miny moe, landing on the decision to teach at Columbia, and when he turns the board back around, all of the cards now read the same thing: Columbia.
Unanimous vote.
It's a fun little moment, one of many throughout the run of the series that indulged Anderson's skill at sleight of hand. As a stand-up comic, card tricks and a general old-timey vibe were hallmarks of his act and stage persona, both before and after Night Court. His most notable role prior to the series was as small-time Boston conman Harry the Hat on Cheers. Decked out in a fedora and a wide 1940s-style necktie, Harry the Hat was a welcome nuisance, running small games at the bar and often getting the best of gullible characters like Coach and Woody. Like his contemporary Sam Malone on Cheers, John Larroquette's lecherous lawyer Dan Fielding is the kind of character that wouldn't really fly today. The show ran long enough to provide Dan with layers underneath his boorish exterior, and Larroquette's performance was so good that it was easy to enjoy the character without fully acknowledging his worst behavior. Dan is often the butt of the joke, and his schemes more often than not blow up in his face, but at the same time he mostly gets a free pass for his callous treatment of women. To its credit, though, the finale reckons with Dan's womanizing not once, but twice, in both dramatic and farcical fashion. In Opportunity Knock Knocks Part 1, Dan's plans to propose to a wealthy publishing heiress are dashed when he discovers that 25 years earlier he'd broken the heart of his would-be fiancé's mother, played by Christine Belford. Belford delivers the revelation in a stark monologue, while Larroquette does some of his best work in the series by just listening. Opportunity Knock Knocks Part 2, on the other hand, gives Dan his comeuppance in the form of a dream sequence, in which every woman he's ever known packs into the courtroom to put him on trial for his misdeeds, with Christine as his defender and Roz as his heartless judge. Richard Mole's breakout bailiff Bull Shannon is but one in a continuum of wacky sitcom characters who are not quite of this earth. From Christopher Lloyd's burnout Reverend Jim on Taxi to Kramer on Seinfeld, the finale finds Bull in the grips of paranoia, convinced that he is being followed by strange men who he believes might be aliens. When we finally see these aliens in Opportunity Knock Knocks Part 2, they are a pair of little old men from Jupiter, Florida, that is. However, at the end of the episode, we see that Bull was right all along. These gentlemen really are from Jupiter, the planet, and have come to Earth to conscript Bull for a mission of intergalactic importance. They need him to reach all the high stuff on their shelves. In an episode full of farewells, Bull's is perhaps the most permanent, disappearing from Harry's darkened office in a flash of light and a roll of the credits. Perhaps that finality is why Mole has been less than enthusiastic over the years about returning to his most famous role.
So, will you come? Okay.
Within a year of the show's final episode, Harry Anderson, Markie Post, and John Larroquette were each headlining their own network series with mixed results. Anderson decamped to CBS for the family sitcom Dave's World, a fictionalized take on the life of newspaper columnist and author Dave Barry. Post also moved to CBS, partnering with John Ritter for the political sitcom Hearts of Fire. The most successful of these, critically if not commercially, was The John Larroquette Show, which ran for 4 seasons on NBC. Larroquette starred as John Hemingway, a recovering alcoholic who works the night shift at a St. Louis bus terminal. While its setup bore similarities to Night Court, the show is much closer to a dramedy or even a weekly short play, particularly in its darker Season 1. Despite Emmy nominations for Larroquette and co-star Liz Torres in its first 3 seasons, the show was never a popular success and was abruptly canceled partway through its 4th season. Several episodes were never aired until released for syndication years later. For fans of Tina Fey's legendary sitcom 30 Rock, it must be both validating and depressing that so many of the show's showbiz jokes have become real-life things since the show ended in 2013. The 2023 Night Court revival could be added to that list as well, except for the fact that 30 Rock didn't just joke about a reunion, it actually made it happen. Sort of. Season 3's The One with the Cast of Night Court sees Kenneth, the NBC page, despondent over the page's new uniforms. To cheer him up, show within a show star Tracy Jordan gathers the cast of Night Court in order for Kenneth to shoot his unauthorized and probably illegal script for a more satisfying series finale. However, Kenneth's plans to give Harry and Christine a proper courthouse wedding go awry when the actors fall back into the same 15-year-old jealousies and arguments. When the Night Court sequel series was announced in 2021, fans were justified in wondering not only who from the original cast might return, but who from the original cast was still alive to return. The series suffered 2 notable deaths while it was still on the air. Original bailiff Selma Diamond died after the first season in 1985, only for her replacement actress Florence Hallop to die after the second season a year later. After Dave's World ended in 1997, Anderson stepped away from the limelight, opening a jazz club in New Orleans where he performed comedy and magic. He took just a handful of on-camera roles in the years that followed on shows like Son of the Beach. In 2018, Anderson died from a stroke in his North Carolina home at age 65. Then in 2021, both Markie Post and Charles Robinson passed away. Like Anderson, Post had stayed away from being a series regular after the end of Hearts of Fire, but had notable roles on Scrubs and Chicago PD. She died after a brief battle with cancer. Robinson was a celebrated stage actor in addition to his on-screen work and had performed with The Wire star Wendell Pierce in a version of James Anthony Tyler's play Some Old Black Man just a few months before his death from a heart attack. The new Night Court doesn't ignore the loss of so many of the original cast members, but rather places that loss front and center in the characters of Abby and Dan. The in-universe death of Harry Stone hangs over the entire revival, with Abby using her Night Court judgeship as a way to connect with a version of her father who she never knew.
You're Harry's daughter. Come in.
The widowed Dan, meanwhile, is more worn out by the length of life in general. Age and a great love have sapped his energy, and his shock at Abby's request for him to return to his old job is rooted in a very relatable feeling. After they stopped working together, he and Harry fell out of touch and did not stay friends. It's a surprisingly real comment on the type of thing that legacy sequels usually ignore. Life goes on after the last episode, and the years spent working in a wacky after-hours arraignment court end up accounting for just a brief chapter in that life. For now, Larroquette is the only returning cast member from the original series. He anchors a young, diverse cast that includes India de Beaufort as Prosecutor Olivia, comedian Lakrita as Gurgs the Bailiff, and Kapil Talwalkar as Court Officer Neil. In January 2023, Marsha Warfield gave the new show her blessing via Twitter, though there is no word yet as to whether she will play Roz once again. Richard Mole, meanwhile, has declined to participate. Presumably, Bull is still reaching tall shelves on Jupiter.